Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. We teach a lot of soft skills on Habitly.com. These are the soft skills of highly successful people. And we teach them because we all need to learn these personally and professionally to have the strongest relationships possible and to maximize our time, whatever objectives we're pursuing. I encourage you to check out Habitly.com. It's very inexpensive. There are short animated episodes that are 5 minutes with hard-hitting best practices at the end. There are also longer, full-blown courses that are very valuable. Today's episode is with Vena Sterling. Now, she is a leadership consultant and coach with the Leadership Research Institute, former lawyer, HR exec, who specializes in culture transformation. She loves to work with women entrepreneurs. We have a great conversation here, things to learn. And the question is, wouldn't you like to have it all? Well, Vena is an expert at helping people get on that path and reach that goal. Let's dive in. Vena, it's great to have you on the show. And I want to ask you a question that's one you posed in your information, which is, what does having it all look like for women entrepreneurs? And is it even possible?
Oh, well, hello, and thank you for having me. That is a question that I love to answer. And I'm going to say it depends on the woman entrepreneur. I think that having it all is something that everyone gets to define for themselves. The challenge is that most of us don't consider the question because we automatically assume that we can't have it all. You'll find articles out there that adamantly, state that you can't have it all or you can't have it all at the same time. And I think it depends on what does having it all look like for you. For me, it's a question that's worth asking, and then looking at, well, what's important to you? Like, what matters? What if you could have it all? What would that look like? And so that's where I like to start.
Well, what if you got because I know you specialize with women entrepreneurs. Let's say you got a woman who has a couple of young kids, but has this vision and is in a corporate position. I don't know. Or maybe has already started something up, but decides to go start something up, either as a partner or go solo, or maybe even do it on the side. How does that look? How do you balance? I know the problem, men have the same problems, but
yeah,
oftentimes they have, a spouse who is willing to carry the kid load more than them. But a lot of times that's a deeper connection for the woman. And how do you balance that and still achieve a dream that you want to achieve?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Planning is for sure important. So in addition to determining what does having it all look like, you really want to have that plan. You want to not just jump out into it without some thought. And one of the things that's going on now, we're calling it the Great Resignation. People are really soul searching. So there hasn't been a better time for someone who's getting out there, starting out, to find the talent, because there are people who were in jobs or their side hustling or side gigs and things like that. The biggest thing that determines success, I would say, is not doing it on your own. Really finding the people who do what they do best. One of the things that I like to take every entrepreneur that I work with through is something called a wealth dynamics assessment for them to really determine what are their strengths as an entrepreneur so they can focus on that. And then with planning, of course, putting some money to the side, hiring people, even if it's, a few hours a week.
So can you give me an example of a client that you've worked with where, this was a struggle for them or maybe they were struggling with it. They weren't doing well, weren't balancing well, weren't having it all while they were trying to have it all. And you kind of helped them down a better path.
Yeah. Well, I worked with the head of a nonprofit organization, and there was a lot of stress around how the team was performing. One of the things that I do is help existing businesses work with their teams to transform their teams. So with her, it really was about her experience. It seemed like no one was doing anything right. She ended up doing a lot of the work for the people that said they would do it, but it wasn't up to par, et cetera, et cetera. So the experience of being a mom, although her son, I think it was around high school, so her son was older, but she was also married, and there was a big sense of frustration. So what we started out doing was looking at her wealth dynamics profile, and it ended up being that she is a creator. So one of the outcomes of that assessment is really finding your direct path to wealth. And as a creator, you really need that focused time to just think, to think strategically. And that wasn't happening. So once we did that, we started looking at, okay, how can we better use everyone in the organization? There were an incredible amount of volunteers. There was an opportunity to build relationships with the board and, determine who could be doing what. And so once she saw, okay, I absolutely need time to think, then we were able to actually look at the calendar. A lot of us are slaves to our calendar. We end up, for me, I worked in corporate, and I practiced law, and I thought it was someone else that was, managing my calendar. And in essence, that was a big part of it. But what happens is a lot of my clients, they leave the corporate world and then they go out on their own, and their calendar looks exactly the same. There's absolutely no white space in this pandemic, what I call, we're all in the Zoomiverse. So, we'd schedule these meetings back to back to back, and a lot of them are complaining and not owning their power in terms of, okay, these are my best times to work. This is when I can do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times when we look at the calendar and we put everything that you want in life there, like there's a space for your family, there's a space for working out, there's a space for quiet time. Actually, when I did this exercise, I only had 3 hours a day to do real work. And it was like, oh. So what that then tells you is, okay, does my business model match up, and is it in sync with the time that I have, right? So I started realizing I get to train other coaches to work with clients. In many cases, I still do one-on-one, but my motto had to change when I realized it's only 3 hours. 3 hours a day.
So is that 3 hours in addition to the creative time or your best? You brought up several things there. Yeah. But one of the things you brought up was, what's the best time of day that I do my best work? And is that separate of that time, or is that 3 hours that you have available include that best time of day for you to do best work?
No, that would be great. I'm not there yet, and most of my clients aren't. They even, sometimes get nervous. I had someone who, really felt like something's got to give. And we talked about like Friday afternoons off, and it felt like, I'm deserting my team. How can I ask them to work if my hours look like this? I generally say, for me in that instance, those 3 hours were hours when I'm speaking to people, I'm on calls. My mornings, I love to leave free for the most part, to have that that's time to think and have time for the things my team needs from me, right? Like, so that's what I consider my work, is keeping my team happy, giving them the things they need from me. And I think that's a great approach to have, really. Like, I feel like I work for my team.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I do something similar where I just block off Fridays. So Fridays are always blocked, and I limit the hours that are available on Calendly for my schedule. I still have not, though, taken your advice. I do typically have mornings on my own, but now I have an East Coast client and I'm located on the West Coast. So I am getting 6 a.m. calls that I have to participate in, which is valuable for the client, but it takes away some of the time that I've used for writing. I have difficulty with the setting aside something midday.
Yeah, that's hard.
That's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have a lot of clients, you know, in their 40s and some in their 50s. And, you know, we talk about menopause, all these things, but, you know, it can be very real. And sometimes, you know, when we talk about, well, how do you build in space for well-being? How do you take a nap?
Yeah.
So there was a time about a year or two ago when I did build in a nap from 12 to 1 every day. And I sometimes recommend it for clients. I felt so guilty doing it. You know, a big part of leadership and entrepreneurship is that self-awareness where you can see that thought that comes up, you know, whether it's time for well-being, taking a nap. There are times I was just meeting a group of women entrepreneurs that I coach, and we were talking about like the sense of when you're eating and not working, how you can feel guilty, like I should be doing something. And we really don't give ourselves the space to be, you know, to have that mental and that emotional bandwidth for people, you know, like for people. And everyone, a big part of my work is helping entrepreneurs discover how their teams, you know, their experience of their teams and working with people. You know, sometimes I share that I resisted leadership. I resisted it in a big way. I grew up in the Bronx. I was the oldest of 3 girls. And while there was a lot of love in my home, I had a parent who struggled with addiction. So I had a lot of responsibility and a lot of, you know, people that I work with, you know, whether it's, you know, a situation like that or something else, but you had a lot of responsibility at a young age. So when my sisters would do something, I would get in trouble. So it's like, wait a minute, what is this leadership? You know, I was told I was responsible. So when I started practicing law and I went into the corporate world and, you know, HR, talent and culture, I resisted it. And I saw some of those same things coming up, like that fear, and I had to get past that. So, you know, I work with people where, you know, the way they talk about the people that they work with, of course, they could do it with me confidentially, but it's like, they don't get it right. You know, they're a pain in the, you know what, and we go deeper to help uncover, you know, what are some of those experiences that we've had in the past that help shape our experience of leadership, and how do we clear some of that up so that we have that bandwidth to really support our teams.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny how we go through tough things in life and then find it gives us an opportunity to help others avoid those mistakes or those pains. And I've only come to realize in the last couple of years, at a more deep level, everybody's got trauma. Like you said, you brought up with you were raised in a loving family, but one parent had an addiction issue. I was raised in a loving family. There weren't any addiction issues, but I still got trauma. They didn't mean to. They didn't mean to. They just had their stuff, and it transfers. But so, how do you walk that fine line of being a coach and not a therapist as you're kind of working with these people and trying to help them look at something that maybe they either haven't been aware of that's from their past, their life experience, might be work experience, but often it's personal, or they were aware of, but, you know, they put it up on the shelf and they closed the closet door and they didn't want to deal with that. But it's affecting how they're working with other people, and you're working for transformation, but it kind of starts with them, right? So I don't know whether you have an example, not mentioning any names, obviously, but where you can walk through, maybe you had a client that was not in a good place and you were able to kind of help them open up and and transform into a much more effective leader, probably much more fulfilling for them.
Yeah, I actually, someone comes to mind. We were working around their mindset with money because they were setting goals that were really low and didn't allow them to even hire the team that they needed, because the money thing is a big one as well. And it turns out that the person grew up in a family where there was always drama around money. They were always fighting about it, So I think it was, the great uncle left it to one of the twin brothers, and this was the daughter, one of the twins. It's totally split up the family. And it just was really hard to get the person to raise their prices despite what was out there in the marketplace. You asked an interesting point in terms of therapy versus coaching. A lot of times with therapy, the goal is to diagnose something just in simple terms, and coaching is really forward facing. But until you can really take a look at some of those automatic patterns, behaviors, and habits without looking at what's underneath them, we really can only get so far. And for the women entrepreneurs that come to me who are at that solopreneur stage, that's really hard. They leave a corporate role. Okay. With, the entire infrastructure, the org chart, everything. And then they go on their own and they try to solo it out. And that just really is the biggest, I think, inhibitor. And a lot of times I hear that it's like, well, I don't have the energy to manage people. It's always something along those lines. But then when we dig deeper, like, well, what were their first experiences with leadership? What was that like? What did they make up? A lot of times we make up things as a little kid, right? Like, or we keep hearing them, money is the root of all evil, things like that. We don't even question it anymore. And I'm sure we're, passing some of that stuff on to our kids. I'm a mom of twin boys. I know they might be in a chair someday. Hopefully it's a coaching chair. Although I'm a big fan of therapy. And, another thing I'll mention is that a lot of times how we show up in one place is how we show up in another place. So that sense of not wanting to deal with people, et cetera. I've even seen it with myself. I'm recently remarried, and whenever there are times when my husband will say he'll do something and he doesn't do it, it's not that big of a deal, but it feels like that thing again, right? Like, it's like I call it sometimes like let down waiting to happen, like there's already a sense of let down inside because of some of the trauma, like you said. And then other people, they just stir it up for us. And that happens a lot of times in the workplace, but we don't give it any thought because we project it out there. Well, that's how this person is, and that's how that person is. At the end of the day, all we can control is our reaction, our response, and go from there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And like you bring up, oftentimes when we have a reaction, there's something deeper that happened in our past that's causing that reaction. And so you bring up your husband and not following through on something that may or may not be a big deal, but it triggers some type of, and I don't know your background, but it can trigger rejection, abandonment, abuse that happened in your past, even though that's not exactly what the person's doing. It's triggering that. And most of us, either through experience or through maturity, don't start to do this work or start to learn these things until we're, older. I'm 65. I'm old. I'm as old as dirt. So, but you're much younger. But the thing is, I've thought many times, what would happen in our country if we taught soft skills, how to work with one another, how to communicate, how to avoid conflict, how to resolve conflict, but also at an age, maybe high school, start to talk about what is trauma, What does that look like? How does it affect people? And you have to walk a fine line if you ever did that, because you don't want, you'd have to teach it in a positive way. And
you don't want to leave them there. You don't want to leave them in that.
Exactly.
You want to actually take them to a different place, but have them. And you raise a good point. There is a fine line, right, between sort of wallowing in it versus like discovering it and then owning it, right? And then a lot of times we're taught to hide our stories. We don't really share them because we think we're the only ones. And that's why I like to work with entrepreneurs in groups. They come together as a community to hear, each other's journey, support each other, hear the stories so that you're not alone. And every time one of us shares something, we empower someone else who thinks, you know what? We've all got something. And I've, worked with a lot of people on money mindset. I used to do money coaching with a large financial institution, and people would get so upset, like no matter what their story, they had a lot of money, but their parents never taught them about money. And then they're upset with that, or, they just feel unprepared, or there wasn't enough. There's just always some form of, in some cases, trauma, and in others, just as human beings, there are things we wished would have been different, right? Like we resist the experiences that life takes us through. My goal in working with someone is to have them really own their story and have power over it. And to the extent they care to, share it in a way that might empower others versus being disempowered around it and having it like something's wrong with them and no one else has anything going on.
Yeah, and I was hearing something recently that reinforces something we teach in our Haverly course on conflict, that, decades ago, venting was thought to be very healthy. And there were a number of groups that even taught it. And what they've found in more recent studies is that venting, even if we're venting to ourselves, this person is doing terrible, this person hates me, this person, whatever, we're repeating a mantra to ourselves, that venting is actually very negative because it further embeds what you're upset about versus releases. And it sounds like you're very good at working with people and helping them to kind of own a healthy piece of who they are that maybe they hadn't looked at. And that transforms the way they work with people.
Yeah, for sure. Your words create your world, and it actually has you vibrating at a different energy. We don't like to talk about energy a lot, but when we walk in a room and something's going on, we can feel it. We can feel when someone has a smile and they're like, how can I support you? What do you need? You can feel that little bit of like, it's you again. Like, what do you want? And also I support them with not, feeling as though there's something wrong with them if they are at that point with their teams, if they just can't answer another question, if they can't resolve another conflict. When we're operating at a point of depletion, our batteries aren't full, then how do you expect to show up for people? It's totally okay. But as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, it really is up to you to, I guess, take the bull by the horns, is the only phrase I can think of right now, but really take charge in terms of your well-being, your ways of working, so that you can be that leader that your team needs, so that you have the energy to get them excited. And a lot of times, I think one of the biggest mistakes also is the entrepreneur is doing too much work in the business.
Yes.
It really and sometimes neglecting one of the big pieces, which is to raise money, to, get the resources coming in and trust your team to do the work. But if you got trust issues, a lot of times we see it in relationships, but we don't think about the work relationships. If you got trust issues in your personal relationships, you probably got them in your work relationships.
And based on your experience of working with people, what are the most difficult people for women entrepreneurs to work with? I don't know whether it's an overpowering man. I don't know whether it's a woman who they have too much empathy for, and so they let, or a man, or a person, too much empathy for, and they let them not perform well for too long, or the poser. Who's the biggest poser when they do hiring, where they think, oh, this person's a match, but it's because it's tricking something from their past, and they trust this person, they bring them on board, and for whatever reason they don't work out. What type of personality types are often the biggest challenges for women entrepreneurs to deal with?
Yeah. I think it's very much an individual thing. Like you said, it depends on the trigger that you have. Another assessment that I like to use is the positive intelligence assessment, because it shows you what your saboteurs are. So we all have a judge, right? So the judge, you can always go to that. The judge is always judging. Okay. The judge is always there. But then there are others. Like for me, I'm a controller. Okay. So it's just left to my own devices, no awareness. I will try to control the situation. But as I mentioned before, with bringing some of that compassion to yourself, growing up the way I did, of course, I have a right to want to control my situation, right? That's what my younger self said. We're going to control this. We're going to make sure things go a certain way.
Well, you had to.
I'm also, yeah, exactly. So it's understandable. So it's like giving some of that compassion. But typically, people who are the opposite can really rub us the wrong way. Like one of the other saboteurs is the avoider. And so when someone just like avoids either conflict or responsibility, that's one that still gets me. But it's about having that awareness that, okay, this person, it feels like they're avoiding this, but how do I bring some compassion? I don't know maybe why that's their go-to, right? Maybe that's what's worked for them. And then a big part of that is learning to coach your team. And that's what we cover as well. How do you ask insightful questions that have the other person, I don't want to say figure it out for themselves, but really grow? Like anyone you hire, there's going to be something, right? It's just like marriage. I don't think there's the perfect spouse. There's always going to be the thing, but you've got to look at overall, what does this person bring to the team? What's the value? And expecting not to get triggered is really unrealistic. It's really about, okay, I'm getting triggered. What's going on here? Is there a value that's been stepped over? Is there a boundary that maybe I need to communicate? Is there an expectation that I have that I haven't communicated? I hear so much from clients who are like, I gave them this project, like what they gave back clearly is not up to par. And I remember myself just starting out. I worked in big law in New York and Florida. And I remember handing in those first few assignments and like getting them back with all the red ink everywhere. You're going to have to train people to your liking and how you do things. But that idea of just the expectations without clearly stating them, that can be a big one. But also realizing there are going to be new things that come up. So one of the things that I help them do in their meetings, in their one-on-ones, is really follow the framework of what's working, and this can be at the end of a project, but it can be on a regular basis, like what's working, what's going well. That's another big thing that we don't tend to celebrate. I don't have them around me here, but I have pom-poms that I like to shake and be a cheerleader. And we don't cheer ourselves. We're just on to the next thing. So what worked? What didn't work? It's an opportunity to air out like what didn't work, and you don't want to point blame, but it didn't work that I had someone who had a presentation and the team, didn't get her set up in time. So it was like, okay, well, let's look at what didn't work. What didn't work is she didn't have the materials that she needed. She wasn't able to show up her best. And then we looked at, well, what requests, have you made? Does the team know by when you want to see the draft? Have you built in the time, the space that we don't give ourselves, right? Have you said a week beforehand, you want to be absolutely finished so you can, practice and be with the material? Maybe then 2 weeks before you all are meeting about, the project, et cetera. So how do we set up the structures that have us win, and how do we ask questions that are insightful without getting stuck in the trigger? The trigger will let you know that something gets to be addressed here, but usually we'll go to the trigger and then we start focusing on with laser focus about what's not working, which then builds us up even more. And then we're angry. Spinning out of control.
Yeah. And, I've only learned recently in the last couple of years that all those triggers come from fear. So 2 major emotions, fear and love. Everything comes from fear or love, and all the triggers are from fear. And so I loved what you said, where you said, the leader then needs to own it. You didn't use these words, but what you're saying, leader needs to own it. And instead of attacking the people on, my presentation wasn't ready on time, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, wait a minute, let's back it up. How could I have communicated better with them? How could I have defined a schedule? And so I love what you're saying. That's great.
And that's similar back to that question of having it all. So when life presents you with experiences that clearly let you know, like, you can't have it all. Like, whether it's like you've got the event and you've got, the personal thing that you're going to miss, whatever it is, those moments when you feel like there's no way I can have it all, then that's the opportunity. That's, for me, that's what having it all is. It's one, in those instances, being able to be with it all, just all the mayhem and all the the meetings and the things and the kids. It's like, this is life when it's working, which is like a radical thought, because it doesn't feel like it's working, right? We can't follow just the feelings. So when you can be with it all and you're not resisting it, you can have that equanimity to then ask some of those poignant questions, right? Like, what would having it all look like for me in this instance? What is missing, right? And so those are how we come up with our biggest structures to put in place. Maybe it's blocking off the every Friday, right? Or a lot of times my clients realize just downright fun is missing. There's no fun in the calendar, whatever they like to do. Like, I like to golf, and then I realized, okay, I'm never playing golf. Like, I don't play. So I started blocking off a few Friday afternoons. I started putting some tennis on my calendar. So for me, the question of can we have it all or not, I think it really is about getting to that state where you can ask, what would having it all look like? What do I need to change here? What conversations do I need to have? What requests do I need to make? So that, I don't know, maybe at one point, maybe we'll, and then there are those moments in life where we feel like, wow, I have it all, right? So I think it really is a journey.
Well, I think we've just gone full circle. And I think, Vena, that's where we need to end. I mean, if there are women entrepreneurs out there in the audience and you want to know how to have it all realistically and comfortably without killing yourself trying to get there, need to get a hold of you. So where do they learn more about you, Vena, so they can learn more about what you do and consider their version of having it all?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am, you can find me at www.lri.com. That's Leadership Research Institute. We've been around for over 40 years, working with leaders and organizations. Our mission is to transform leaders, to transform the world. So it really is starting from the inside out and connecting yourself with other entrepreneurs who have the same goals and learning how to transform a team so that you can create results far beyond what you could create on your own.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. Wasn't that fun? If you like the episode with Vena, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. We love feedback. And don't forget our sponsor, Habitly, where you can learn the habits of highly successful people, basically consistent with what Vena was teaching or talking about, how you can have it all. Well, you can't have it all if your soft skills are terrible. You've got to have strong soft skills. So check out habitly.com. There's a lot of value there for you. Again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. We've got more great guests coming. Bye for now.